along to the Festival Football Sports Journalism Breaking the Mould session hosted by FAIR, the international body working to combat inequality and also use sport for social change. I'm your moderator, Batson. It's lovely that you've joined us today for this session. Now, FAIR works globally with football's governing bodies, leagues, clubs, international NGOs and fans to tackle discrimination on and off the pitch. And it's running an online Football People Festival of Ideas as part of the hashtag Football People Weeks, which takes place every year. Now, this is the largest campaign for social change. There's over 150,000 people that take part in all the activities every year around the world. And this is the first year the festival is online, and there are 12 sessions taking place over 5 days or so, tackling the big issues around social change throughout football globally. So if you're interested in any other sessions, please do sign up to fairnet.org. Now, for a long time, there's been like this specific mold of what a sports journalist should be, from who you are, how you look, how you talk, where you're from, what your mannerisms are, what you should observe. There was hardly any room or any space for variation at all. And over the recent years, thankfully, there's been an emergence of more women, ethnic minorities, and LGBTQ plus people into sports media, sometimes into mainstream, but also creating their own platforms and using social media as well. We're going to explore with several journalists that have joined me today and broadcasters about how they broke the mold, how they maintained their authentic voice as well, what they've done to break the narrative, and ask them what needs to be done so other voices are heard loud and clear. And as I mentioned, I'm not on my own today. I've been joined by 4 wonderful people who I'm really excited going to be part of this conversation. First up, Marion Reimers, who is a journalist from Fox Sports Mexico. She's also let me count these ones. She's also works on the Olympics, the World Cup, Champions League, UEFA as well. And she's also the founder and president of Versus, an NGO that works towards gender equality and in sport and in journalism. Hola, Marion.
Hi, greeting from Mexico, you guys. I'm so pleased to be here. Big hugs to everyone.
Great for you to join us. Next up, somebody I know really well, John Holmes. He's a senior editor at Sky Sports and founder of Sports Media LGBT+, which is a consultancy and advocacy group. Hi, John. How are you doing? Good to see you.
Really good to see you, Anne-Marie. Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be with you.
Yeah, good to see you, man. Also joining us all the way up, my German's really poor, Guten Tag, Musa Okwonga, bit of a legend, writer, broadcaster, author, musician, trained as a lawyer in a former life. Have I missed anything off, Musa?
Yeah, or actually what you did miss is that what we say here in German is actually hello. So we actually...
There's me trying to be all clever there. Hello, Musa. How are
you? Very well, thanks. Great to be here. All good.
Thanks
all good.
for joining us. And last but never least in my world, Shireen Ahmed, who's an activist, writer, broadcaster, mentor, also part of the brilliant Burn It Down podcast, a feminist sports podcast. You've got some good news today, didn't you, about your podcast, I believe, Shireen? Is that right?
I did. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so humbled to sit amongst these greats. We got picked up by Blue Wire Distribution Network. So it's a really big deal for us. You know, we were a small little engine that kept going and going. There's a lot to burn down. I'm just so excited to be here.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you all of you for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. And please, for everybody watching, make sure you get involved in this conversation because we want your contributions. They're just as important what we're just going to talk about in the next few minutes. Please use, though, the hashtag #FootballPeople in all your tweets about this session and the festival as well. All right, enough talking from me. Let's dive straight in. Marion, I'm going to come to you first. We're going to look at traditional barriers which still exist, unfortunately. How can the role of sports journalism impact gender equality?
I think it's a very interesting and very difficult question because when I started out 14 years ago, and I don't want to make this a self-referential situation, but I think it is a very good example. There were very few women on camera and off camera. Nowadays, we have a few more in Mexico and in Latin America, but the big thing is the decision makers are still not women. We have very few women in the newsroom. We have very few representation. And I think that it is very interesting in terms of how we include women in such a big part of public life, because usually we're thought about, or women are thought about just being part of the domestic life, not even a private life, but a domestic life. So sports is a very big part of public life, and the way we talk about our mythology, our modern mythology, our modern heroes. So we cannot be what we cannot see. We've heard this so many times. But I also think that the narrative has been changing or has been shifting. And that is very complicated because, for example, when I started out being a play-by-play commentator last 2 years ago, it was very difficult because the way we scream goals in Spanish has been marked by male voices. So we do not have a referential mark in our brains for how it is for a woman to talk about sports or to yell a goal, no? Because we scream. You guys in Europe or in England or in Germany don't do that, but we're Latin, so we're very high-heated, or we're very heated. So in that sense, I think we can change the way in which we are represented. We can change the way in which we are talked about, and we can also change all of these mainstream ideas about mythology or about modern heroes. But what I've come to conclude is, do we really have to do that from mainstream media? Is it possible? Or do we actually have to create completely new platforms like the one Shireen has and the rest of her colleagues in order to actually be able to possess that voice?
Yeah, it's a really good point, which we'll come on to in a bit. John, I'm going to come to you now. I mean, how is the LGBTQ plus community been impacted by these blooming barriers?
Yeah, really significantly. I think, personally speaking, I had that experience of needing to break the mold in order to kind of come out in my own workspace. And a lot of the work that we've done at Sports Media LGBT is trying to kind of empower people to do the same if they're part of the community and they want to be more visible and be more representative. So I think from my own perspective, the barriers that were there were, as you say, a very kind of male-dominated workplace, kind of a level of conversation that was only really about one thing, not really understanding, having that language of diversity and inclusion that we're much more familiar with these days. I think part of it was the fact that I was part of the mold myself. I literally was the kind of the cis white male guy in the sports newsroom. So in order for me to feel a little bit different, I had to be what Marion said. I had to be, if I wanted to see the difference, I had to be the difference. So I was really, really conscious of that. And now I think we're moving towards a space now where there's a greater understanding of all different types of identities within the LGBTQ family. And if we can use our platforms to give some greater visibility, whether that's in terms of people from more grassroots sport or all the way up to the elite level, and ourselves as sports journalists, if we can encourage that more, then I think people will feel that the barriers that we experienced when we were younger might not necessarily be there anymore.
Do you still, though, feel, John, that there is still a long way to go in terms of breaking down those barriers, or are you starting to see little chinks appear now, or even gaps in the wall? I think so, yeah, absolutely. It just needs people to give it a push, to have that confidence and a lot of being LGBTQ comes down to confidence in some respects, in terms of how visible you want to be in your own space or in a public forum, such as kind of the sports journalism industry. But I think I found, I work at a big media organization, but I've got colleagues in my network who also work at what might be seen to be more conservative media establishments. They are in their own way kind of pushing at those walls and pushing them down and getting those voices onto the platform that might not have been heard 15, 20 years ago. And that's really encouraging. Musa, I'll come to you next. Social media platforms are now offering opportunities to combine football and social commentary together. That wasn't there before. How much is that going to impact mainstream media, do you think?
I think it already has. I think people say that Twitter is an irrelevant platform a lot of the time because a lot of people aren't on it, but editorial lines are driven so much by Twitter, as many of us will recognize. I'm sure Shireen's had plenty of storylines stolen, and yeah, Shireen knows. Yeah, so it's already driving that conversation. Like, I think actually, you look at someone like Dave Zirin, Edge of Sports, and what he's been able to do with his platform. I think that we have a real opportunity because people who know their sport, regardless, whatever sport you follow, people who know their sport really well, who know their politics really well, and the intersection of the two have a real opportunity, I think, to get in there ahead of the curve and shape the media narratives the next few days after a story breaks.
Yeah, absolutely. Shireen, let's come to you next. How has social media, somebody who's very prolific on social media, has a podcast, has helped somebody like you combine social issues that you're very passionate about and sport, as well as impact on mainstream media?
I agree completely with Musa. I think that it already has. I mean, my journey, I didn't go to journalism school, so I'm an untraditional journalist. I mean, everything about me is non-conforming and untraditional, quite frankly. I mean, when I tell people I'm a sports journalist, they're like, what? Really? Because I don't at all look like, particularly where I am in North America, where my industry is 90% cis, het, able-bodied white men. That's who I'm surrounded by. And in Canada, I would even venture to say 95. So I'm completely different. So I use Tumblr to self-publish because nobody would take my pieces. Nobody would take me seriously because there's a pre-existing concept of what, very much to what Marion said about the way that you call goals. This entire industry is built on opinions of men. Now, earlier we talked a little bit about what do we do? Do we like burn it all down, or do we, and just metaphorically speaking, I think the thing that we do is we continue to build. I'm a huge supporter of independent media. I mean, I haven't been able to infiltrate necessarily. Now I'm doing more. I say infiltrate, what a terrible choice of words. Or is it though? I think that getting access, but you have to build a portfolio. Mine was done completely over Twitter. And, building, showing your work, showcasing your work, freelancing. I'm still a freelance journalist, although I have quite close ties with TSN in Canada. But I think the thing is that took a very long time. This is my 10th year doing this work. And I like being a freelancer. It would be lovely to get health benefits, obviously, but at the same time, I am building what I need to get grounded. And so for young aspiring sports writers, whether in disabled communities, queer communities, racialized communities, networking has been key. And one of the things that's helped me considerably through social media is finding communities, particularly like this one, the co-panelist here is critical, and finding people, because the world is a lot kinder than it seems to be. And finding those people that you connect and understand that our challenges are connected, our struggles are connected, is really, really important here. And you get enthusiasm. I met all of my co-hosts of Burn It All Down on Twitter. That's where we met. And, it has used as, I've used it as a tool, not just professionally speaking, but for personal networking. And now those people are some of my closest friends. So from a personal and professional perspective, I think it's invaluable.
Yeah, very much so. I've got to say, Shireen, when somebody decides to make a comment to you that's particularly negative, I love your clapbacks, as the young people say. I think it's just, I just wish I was more like you in that respect. I wish I had that confidence to just shut somebody down very quickly, but I just.
The young people, yes, my children cringe as they watch this. I think that also has a lot to do with it. I mean, I'm in my 40s. I don't care. What do you like? Really? Do I care? No, I don't.
Marion, actually, that brings me on to my next point in terms of women commentators. I learned I didn't even know this, that this year has seen women commentating for the first time on men's games in Peru and Argentina, which is just absolutely amazing. But what needs to be done to convince you there should be a more saturated effort, a more sustained effort when it comes to this type of commentary, but also encouraging media outlets to diversify their coverage?
That's a very interesting point. I wish, as well as you, I was more like Shireen, not only in terms of how she answers, which I've been trying to learn, but I wish I could improve my English, but I'm gonna try and come across as good as possible in this language. The thing is, when I started commenting on the Bundesliga, it was very interesting because my mother tongue is German. I was born in Mexico, but I'm from a German family. I know the culture perfectly. I know football. I studied to be a manager. I'm not going to be a manager, but I wanted to have all of that knowledge. And still, there is a huge machismo culture around sports, and particularly in Mexico, which leads us to believe that men have sports embedded in their DNA. We just assume they know sports. And let me just tell you a little secret, 90% of men don't know half of what they say they know about sports. I'm sorry about that. So
it's true. It's true. No, it's why you're apologizing.
It's just a thing where they also feel they have to socialize through this idea, because otherwise they're also socially punished. So it's not good for them and it's not good for us. So what happens when you start talking about sports? People think like, oh my God, there is a person with different genitalia memorizing the names of other 22 human beings in a tactical game. Wow. This is newsworthy, and it's not newsworthy. The thing is that we assume women are like these aliens. We're weird in sports. And the thing about that, what happens is that we're supposed to be commenting on women's sports, particularly women's sports that also satisfy the male glance and the male gaze. Women that practice sports, and I have nothing against those sports, no? But where clothes are a bit more tight, where you wear makeup, and where beauty standards are aligned with the practice of these sports. So when we talk about other things, it's okay, you can talk about women's football, but not men's. And it makes no sense because it's basically the same sport. So what we should do in that sense, I think, is we have to deconstruct the myth that we are not able to talk about these things just because we're women and because we don't understand the game. Because it's like saying you cannot be a political analyst because you didn't campaign for presidency. So we would not have political analysts. And it's just I'm sorry, but it's a really stupid point of view. But we keep on being marginalized because of that. And one thing that worries me a lot is that if other girls and other women see this violence that comes against us in social media, and also from our colleagues, in the case of Shireen, myself, and I don't know about you, Anne-Marie, and obviously also Musa and John on a different perspective, but that also isolates women. Who's gonna want to be a sports commentator when they see they're yelling at me, they're telling me I'm a lesbian, they're telling me that I should go to the fucking kitchen? I mean, nobody wants to be in that environment. Nobody. I'm sorry, I just used the F word. I'm Mexican. I'm sorry. I told you I don't dominate this language. I'm so sorry. But point is, I'm quoting somebody else.
No worries, Marion. We get it. I understand where the place you're coming from. I will say, I will apologize if anybody was offended by that, but of course, continue, Marion, please.
I'm sorry. I apologize as well. I'm going to be serious again. The thing is, we have to be very careful, because what we're doing is we're alienating other people. We're alienating other voices. We're alienating the trans community. We're alienating people from another religion. We're alienating disabled persons. So we have to be very careful about that, because it is just a fear of losing privilege.
John, you can help me with this one, because I remember when we had Vicky Sparks started commentating on football matches, and Robin Karen, who both work for the BBC, and Musa, you probably picked this up as well on social media, and probably Shireen as well. There was such a storm about these two brilliant women who are very capable of talking about the highlights package or match of the day. They're very capable of talking about football matches, and the storm about their voices were too high pitched. They, people questioned their gender, what they look like, etc., etc. It went absolutely mad, didn't it, John, for a period of time?
Yeah, and sadly, I mean, that hasn't stopped. I mean, perhaps the volume of it has decreased, but those voices are still out there, and Twitter, sadly, and other social media platforms give them, amplification. But I think largely, that has reduced, and now I think people are much more understanding. As always, we perhaps get too bogged down with those people that do speak up and say horrible things on social media, and the abuse can be really, really nasty towards women in sports journalism in particular. And I think it's really important that the industry is trying to do more to combat that. But I also think we need to recognize that social media tends to filter those voices through onto your timeline, when actually the vast majority of people are nodding in silent approval. The silent majority we often speak of. That's the shift that we're seeing.
Yeah, very much so. Musa, can I ask you about the differences between German and English media as well, mainstream and independent, in terms of presenting different ideas, diverse views? Because you're somebody who has moved abroad. Another person I can think of is Samantha Johnson at TRT World in Istanbul.
Oh, she's amazing. Shout out to Samantha. She's amazing.
Yeah, been absolutely amazing. Is that what if an aspiring sports journalist or broadcaster or commentator for that matter, do they need to think about actually going to another country to get that opportunity to do something that they love?
Can I say that's an incredible question? Like, just this, before I answer it, that is actually one of the best questions, because we talk so much about footballers moving abroad, but I'd never thought of the concept of doing that, whether that's exactly what I did. Like, it's no news to anyone. I didn't really get picked up by anyone. And I came to Germany, did my own thing, and now I'm doing Stadio, working with The Ringer, and I absolutely love that. Shout out to them. Shout out to Ryan Hun, incredible co-pilot of Stadio. Well, he's kind of a pilot, but no, like, coming to Germany was amazing, because when you come abroad, you see a different media culture, so you get a chance to bring something new to it. Also, Berlin is an entirely different center of gravity. All of a sudden, Finland is 2 hours away on the plane. Holland is an hour away. So you've got this whole new community of people you can draw from. And what I would say the German context is interesting. I would say that the analysis is maybe a bit less sensational in the mainstream. We've still got tabloids here, but I would say the coverage of German football is a bit more sober than the coverage of English football. It's a bit less sensational at the mainstream level. It's quite a sort of forensic approach. Not to say that it's perfect. There's a great emphasis on fan culture and the voices of fans. I mean, there's a big ultra movement here, and ultras here are stigmatized as a concept, but in Germany, there's a really great deconstruction of what ultras do in terms of the social benefit they bring to clubs, and a lot of them, or most of them, are really progressive in Germany. So I would say there's a better understanding of the social model in football as it relates to wider society in the German context. I think that actually a lot of the English football media can maybe learn something from quite usefully. But yeah, thank you. Great question. Wow, great question.
You're most welcome. Shireen, let's come to you next. Is it easier now to platform the voices of the underrepresented because the media landscape is changing so much?
I think it's going to be a constant battle. I mean, we're nowhere near done. I mean, just because we're able to get this brilliant platform of people, I would like to see more. I would like to see far more racialized women in these spaces. I think there's also a huge need to understand gender non-binary and gender fluid folks in this space, and we don't see enough of that and understand that. And the discussion that is limited within the binaries, we just need to understand that that's not where it ends. And for me, like, it's not like, oh, we've got a hijabi, like, Fadumo Alo, who's with the Telegraph. It's not like, and shout out to all those people. But also, let's back up for a minute. Who gave those people that opportunity? I mean, I'm going to say hi to Anna Kessel at Telegraph. We took a chance on these people. And that's the other thing. Who are the decision makers? Who are the people that are creating spaces? My co-host Lindsay Gibbs started a newsletter. She's asking other people to contribute, and she's bringing them up. I certainly worked hard. I hustled, and no one gave me anything, but I did get shout outs. I did get people helping me. So there are spaces where you have people trying to help and amplify each other and give each other a shot, because ultimately where I am in North America, this is very much an access industry and who you know. So my whole philosophy is that you are a racialized person, you need help, call me. And I'm very clear when I mentor young aspiring sports journalists that if you are from a queer community, or you are disabled, or you are racialized, I will try to email you back in 48 hours. If you're a white straight guy, you might never hear from me again, because you actually do not need my help. And I want to apologize for this, because like there's a priority in terms of, and it's not as if those voices aren't important. And much to Marion's point, they're credible and they're qualified. I mean, what really bugs me is, are you qualified? Are you too biased? I can't talk about race because I'm a racialized woman. I don't even understand what that means, because who set the tone for what objectivity is within sports journalism? Who made those rules? And I'm not demure in any sense of the word, but I completely reject that philosophy. I won't tolerate it. You can be capable. I mean, very much of what, like, I love Musa's work. I love his writing. So much of what John has done is create a place for those voices. And then there can be, I still believe in creating our own spaces and creating media, but also interweaving those with what's pre-existing. Because I think we need to inhabit all these places. We need to be everywhere. It's not like I just will settle for us having independent media only. It's important to be in all those places. And I think that there's a lot of work to do yet. I mean, I'm happier now than I was. If you told me 2 years ago that we would have a panel like this, I would have been like, no, it's not possible. But it is. And so I'm imagining what it looks like. I want to be, at one point, I want to be considered like irrelevant. My goal is to be irrelevant and outdated. That's how much I want racialized women in these space, young Muslim women, you know, women from South Asia, women from East Asia. I want them collaborating and contributing to these spaces so that, oh, I remember Shireen. Wasn't she like ages ago? Like, I would love that ideally.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, John, actually, that nicely segues into my question about Sky Sports, because a few years ago, let's be honest, a big entity, a media entity like Sky Sports, for example, wouldn't have entertained having a more diverse workforce. And thankfully, things have changed, particularly employing an openly gay sports journalist. So what's changed, do you think, from the before to today?
Well, I think particularly for Sky, like a big media organization such as the one that we work in, it's the larger business, it's the wider business. So sports is only one part of that. So I'm very fortunate that there's a great LGBT network at Sky. It's been running for about 8 years now. You know, so already the business was understanding more about LGBT inclusion before I sort of came out or rolled around at Sky Sports and decided to do what I wanted to do. Also, there needs to always be kind of an icebreaker, a gateway drug, for want of a better word, so something that gets you into that conversation and allows you to kind of, you know, the title of this discussion is Breaking the Mold, something that allowed us to break the mold of sports and to delve into something that we'd not really looked at in any great detail before. And yeah, it does help to be a queer person within that space, because I was the one that wanted to bang the drum. Unfortunately, there were some people around that were prepared to listen. You know, for us, there was a great short film called Wonder Kid that told the story of a fictional gay footballer. It was this great little film that had Sky talent already involved with it in terms of lending their voices. Obviously, people know Martin Tyler, our lead commentator, Jeff Shreves, all these kind of people. They were already involved in the project. And it just needed somebody or a group of us to come along and say, actually, you know, let's really invest some Sky energy in this and lift it. And that enabled us to start off a whole load of conversations, which led to us coming on board with the Rainbow Laces campaign in a really big way. And that has obviously been like the driving force behind Sky's, you know, greater understanding and visibility that we've given to LGBT voices in sports. So that's been really, really exciting. And you know, that all corresponded with myself kind of building my own confidence up as an out gay man working in sports media. You know, it wasn't until I was in my early 30s that I came out. And so, you know, I was happy to be on that learning curve myself, and, you know, just being able to meet so many different people from the community who are involved in sport in lots of different ways has really kind of opened my eyes to, actually, you know, there are loads of LGBT people in sport. The problem that we have is that a lot of them just aren't really confident about being visible about it. So, you know, the more that we can encourage them by sharing stories, and Sports Media LGBT was completely set up to do that. It was established to try to encourage people to share their stories.
Well said. Marion, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
It says here, Marion, you're such an inspiration for me and many others. What can you tell young journalists that want to get involved in the big stages of journalism but are not part of the great metropolis? I love the word metropolis, by the way.
Wow. That is a very difficult question, particularly in Mexico City, because we have like this huge head and very little body, because our country is just massively focused on the big capital. So in that sense, I think that new media and new platforms have helped in order to do that. And I think in that way, we also have to pay attention to other smaller cities in size, but yet very important when it comes to sports. We have León, we have Aguascalientes, we have all of these other cities. And I reckon that in other countries, it's very similar. So in that sense, I think, first and foremost, if you want to insert yourself in this kind of mainstream media, one advice that I might give, and it just comes from experience, not because I'm on a moral high ground, is you have to have a lot of tolerance to frustration. It is a very frustrating place. You need to have a lot of resilience. But one beautiful thing that I've also come to understand is that we can generate networks. We can have networks amongst women, disabled women, or people in general, transgender, non-binary. Like, we've always been sort of outcasts. One group more than others. I mean, I'm a white cisgender woman. What can I say? I'm also incredibly privileged. But I do believe that the first thing is that you should not feel alone. There are a lot of us that think like you guys, and you should come to us. And just as Shireen mentions, you can always write. And yes, absolutely. If you're a white cisgender male, I'm probably going to take a bit longer to answer. But definitely, let's make that network and be strong, be not alone, and look for others like you, because that also happens a lot to communities and groups that have been historically ignored or are vulnerable historically. We don't talk about these things. We just assume that we have to be strong. We just assume that we have to be silent. We just assume that we have to be resilient in this very lonely place. And there are actually so many people going through crossroads, through different problems. So we should actually mention this. And in that way, thank you so much for reaching out. And absolutely, I think that if we are working in mainstream media, I am also going to make a bigger personal effort in terms of including other cities that are not the big metropolis.
Another question actually that nicely segues into it. It's a long question, but I'm going to cut it down a fair bit. It says, I studied journalism in El Salvador, a country like Mexico, sadly plagued by this macho culture in the media platforms and society. How can we generate rigorous journalistic coverage with issues related to racism and discrimination when there is no interest on the part of bosses who dominate the platforms to publish? And then they go on to talk about the incident that took place in the USA, the team led by Landon Donovan, and the attacks that occurred against one of his players. John, I'll come to you for that one, if I may. So the question is, how can we generate journalistic coverage with issues such as what happened to Landon Donovan when there is no interest on the part of the bosses?
Well, I kind of think that often the bosses are unsure and they're worried about getting it wrong. And I think that's often where these problems lie. I think there are stories that certain editors of perhaps if they're, we've talked about cis white het men, they're well established in their roles and they don't think that there's an audience out there for some of this content, but also they're worried about potentially screwing it up and getting criticized. So, we need to collectively kind of share our understanding, our experience, lean on them, put pressure on them. And often that comes from within the newsroom. I found that the more that we've done stories that are, looking to tackle discrimination in all its forms, actually that's grown a knowledge base within the newsroom, and it's made people more confident to not shy away from covering these really important stories. The more that we can do that and share our collective experience, then I think you're more likely to see those barriers broken. Actually, I find so many of the LGBTQ related stories that I cover do pull in big numbers. There is an audience out there for people that are really interested in the experience of LGBT people in sport. And it's not just LGBT people that are reading these stories or consuming them. It's the whole sports audience. People are interested in, human interest is something that we don't actually talk about enough in sport. People are too obsessed with stats and with, tactics. All those things have a place. But nothing beats being able to empathize with another individual and put yourself in their shoes and understand what they've been going through.
If I can just jump in here really quickly, I think one of the things that concerns me about that whole idea that the upper echelons don't want to be criticized, it brings me back to the idea that people are so afraid they'll do more to show they're not racist or anti-oppressive, as opposed to actually help fix the systems and dismantle the systems of oppression. And that really bothers me, because part of showcasing the voices, and let's not forget the intersections. It's almost like we're talking about LGBTIQ folks who aren't racialized. Like that's not okay, because there are so many intersections in those ways. And there has to be some bravery, and there has to be a change and a shift amongst those decision makers to say, well, take a chance, because they have to. The status quo is simply not okay. I can't deal with people so worried to move and interested. If we need a seismic shift here in terms of what needs to happen. And there's people who are pushing at those mountains, and there's a lot of us. So either you get with the program or you step aside.
I always remember when Tom Daley came out with his YouTube video that had huge kind of reach. And I remember being in the newsroom on the day that that broke, and one of my editors kind of frowned upon it, said, "Oh, we won't be reporting this. It's not sports news," thinking that he was preaching to the converted. This was in 2013. So, you know, we've come a long way in 7 years. But actually, there were other people in the newsroom, other than me being the only gay guy, saying, actually, you know what, you're wrong. This is news. This is important. This is really going to have an impact for young people in particular. And of course, we covered it. And of course, you know, millions of people read it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I jump
Marion,
in
go ahead.
before I leave?
Yes, I was going to say, I'm watching the clock and I'm thinking, I was just going to say to you, Marion, how long we got you for another minute or so?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is very interesting, and I absolutely agree with John and with Shireen. We're not supposed to allow this. The thing is that who decides what is sports and what's not? And in that sense, they tell me this is not newsworthy, this is not sports, but we get to talk about the boyfriend of Neymar's mother or of Sergio Ramos's haircut. So I think that we have a very two-sided idea of this. And I think we should also push this philosophical question. Where does journalism begin and where does entertainment begin? Because sports is always, and sports media is always in between of this question. How much are we supposed to entertain and how much are we supposed to do serious journalism? And in that sense, and I believe in El Salvador and in Mexico and Central America, it's very much like that. We're just a little step above tabloids and other kind of media. And if we want to be taken seriously, we have to take this job seriously. And sports journalism, to me, it's just as serious as politics, because a lot of people watch more people watch a football game than they do watch a show of political analysis. So I do believe we have a huge Trojan horse that we need to use appropriately. So do not tell me that a man coming out in sports is not newsworthy if you are going to be talking about Sergio Ramos's haircut, because I couldn't care less. Thank you, guys.
On that note,
wow, my goodness.
I think that's a brilliant way. I should explain that Marion has got to go and do her other job and commentate on a Champions League match involving Real Madrid. So unfortunately, we're going to have to say goodbye to Marion. Marion, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor to speak to you today. Good luck this evening with the match. Hope it goes well.
Thank you, guys. Thank you once again. And I admire you all, and thank you to all the people who were here, because we are getting used to not listening to others. So I appreciate you guys listening to us, even with my foul language. I'm sorry if I offended anyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye, guys.
Yeah, take care of yourself. Thanks, Marion. Thank you. And of course, just a reminder to everybody, thank you. I've been getting questions in as we've been talking, which has been great. And I'll try to get to, we've had quite a few questions come in, which is amazing. And I'll try to get as many as I can. But do remember to use the hashtag if you're tweeting about this event on social media. The hashtag is football people, and also talk about what's happening the rest of the week as well. I loved Marion's comment about talking about the boyfriend of Neymar's mother. That was just brilliant. That just made me chuckle so much.
But there is importance about the conversation about beards and men's football. Like, I'm here for that conversation. Yeah. And you all know that.
Yeah, very much so. There is a certain red top newspaper, shall we say, that likes to regularly post pictures up on social media of footballers and their girlfriends in dressed in bikinis and things like that. And you just think, oh, come on. Really? Anyway, right, let's move on. So, Musa, let's come to talk to you. I want to talk to you about alternative media now. When do you think YouTubers will be fully integrated into mainstream media? Because isn't there kind of like a double-edged sword to this? Because it's great that they're starting to be more awareness about what YouTubers can bring to the conversation, but at the same time, it opens them up to a whole load of abuse on social media too.
I feel like they already are. Like, if you can have like a heavyweight fight between two YouTubers basically selling out in a large arena, it's already mainstream. When we say mainstream, often what we mean is they're just a bunch of editors who are still a bit scared of this whole YouTube thing, not paying attention, but everyone else is on board with it. I mean, in the German political context, you've got like YouTubers being quoted, cited, debated by like leading political parties in like one of Germany's, one of Europe's biggest democracies. So I think it's already driving conversation. You talked before about how we get talking points in from El Salvador and the Landon Donovan issue. Well, look at Twitter and YouTube. Those platforms made that story inescapable, to the point where editors were getting all these messages from their assistants going, you need to talk about this, otherwise you're behind the curve. So I feel like the integration, to be honest, it's already happened. Like, that makes sense. I think we're already there.
And my follow-up question is though that they even more integrated than they are there, but actually
right.
seriously, I agree with you. They are there already. I agree with that. But I do feel sometimes that some of them are just not taken seriously. They're just, come on a show, talk a bit about football, then they're back off again.
Yeah. Do you know, I think the problem with YouTube is it's a performance, right? You're a YouTuber. You're basically like, you've got a certain persona. A lot of those people, they come to fame, but they've built a certain, I won't name names, but certain individuals on YouTube, and this is out of respect. I don't want they've already been through that, but certain individuals build their name on YouTube over the course of 15 years. People find a 15-year-old video, and then all of a sudden that person who's built a profile on YouTube who comes into the mainstream is like accountable for stuff they did 15 years ago. Now they need to be accountable because it's in the domain, but then there's this whole thing. I think YouTube is different because they grow up differently. And that I think is the problem in crossover. So it's the problem that some brands are having making a bet on YouTube is because if you've grown up in the generation of YouTube, and I'm not, I'm an old man, I'm 41. I mean, this hair was not shaved off, it fell out, right? So I didn't grow up in the public eye, but these people did. And I think the one thing that we're seeing, if there is a final lack of respect that they're getting, is because brands who are ultimately very conservative are still thinking, is that person vetted, road tested? Because if we plunge them in the middle of Champions League coverage alongside Marion, and all of a sudden a video comes up from so-and-so ago and they're being ignorant as hell, we can't afford that risk. So I almost feel like it's a next generation of YouTubers who have grown up a bit more savvy, a bit more edited, if you will. And I reckon they're the generation a couple of years from now that people will be betting big on, because that's when YouTube will be seen to have matured as a viable go-to for this kind of media. 40
years young, by the way, Musa. It's all good.
Please, listen. The compliments get you nowhere.
Shireen, let's talk about changing the narrative. What changes do we need at a structural and personal level across journalism to address intersections of racism and misogyny in sport?
I mean, that could be a whole panel in itself, like this whole discussion on approaches that we need to take. I think there's also a difference between the ways and approaches and methodologies of journalism. Like punditry is different than opinion, is different than investigative reporting. So, you've got people who are gatekeepers very much in that. And that was my struggle, and my test, I guess you could say, was to sort of push back at that. I mean, it starts from everything. For me, language is the basis of everything. It really is, not just semantics, but very truly your intentionality behind the language you're using. If you're reporting on sexualized violence in sport, what words are you using? How are you framing things? And I think it's really, really key to understand, to always unlearn and relearn. This is something that I cannot emphasize enough within the industry. I have had to relearn, particularly issues about LGBTIQ stuff. I've had to relearn trans athletes talking about whether they're non-binary. I've really, particularly around the case of Quinn, who's on the Canadian national women's team. And I think the discussions about how Quinn was spoken of and was really problematic. They were dead named several times, and we have to unlearn these things and approach it better. And even the way in which, I was in the beginning of my career and watching Serena Williams have to deal with constant misogyny on the global level, and it was unacceptable and it was frustrating. So my thought is, how do I do my job and also dismantle these pieces? How do I do what I'm supposed, which is a big ask, but I'm sorry, I do feel like marginalized folks carry more labor. We do more labor. The change starts very much from these spaces. And thinking about how we approach things, there's also an added layer of vulnerability. Like if I don't always want to talk about being a racialized Muslim woman in this space, but it's intrinsic. I can't divorce that from my work. But it's very refreshing sometimes to only go in and talk about football. It's lovely to have to do that. I mean, if you want to talk to me about Sergio Ramos, I will. I'll go off. That's a nod, Musa. I'm expecting a call from you. I think, and you know how I feel about Real Madrid. But anyways, I think the thing is that there's a way that we have to navigate and do it well. Also, who tells the stories is as important. Who tells the stories themselves. And this is something I learned from my co-host, Jessica Luther, who writes a lot about gendered violence in sport. And that's, for me, that changed the way that I approach sports journalism completely. And that we don't realize that lived experience strengthens something. So as a personal approach, if I'm asked to write about issues in queer community and sport, I will say, listen, I can refer you to these people. It's so simple. I remember somebody approached me and said, hey, can I interview you because Team Palestine just won the AFC championship? I'm like, I'm not Palestinian. It's really not that hard for you to actually find somebody who is. And then I referred them. Have people in your, is the Rolodex exist anymore? Do people still have those? I don't know. In your now, I'm so old.
We have the printing press now as well.
Yeah, we have electricity too.
Carrier pigeons do amazing.
I love carrier pigeons. So I think that use your networks, reach out to people. I've collated a list and have a list of racialized women and non-binary folks in sports media. It was a side thing that I did. So editors couldn't come and say, well, we actually couldn't find a Black woman who talks about baseball in Chicago. I'm like, Shakia Taylor is there. I have her email. You can have my list. This is very easy. This is not complicated. You need a sports historian, Dr. Amir Rose Davis. This takes not a lot of effort. It really is not that difficult. And you'll see how people don't do the least amount. That's the one thing I'm finding. The level of mediocrity in this industry is shocking to me. And
I was going to say, it's also a comfort zone as well.
Yeah, but I mean, what is that even? We don't get to have comfort zones. Like, this is my comfort zone. So what does that even mean? Like, do better. Is like, it's really not that hard. And I'm happy to share again after this on Twitter, that list that I have. If you're looking for people, racialized folks in sports media who are not cis het men that are white, I have that. So hit me up.
Yeah, very much so. One more question for all of you, and I'll come to each of you. I'll start with you, John. What's your responsibility for the long term?
My responsibility is to get LGBT people more on sports media platforms. That's always kind of been that's been my ambition for the last 5 years. And I think because the visibility is so focused at the elite level, particularly in this country, there's such a fascination with trying to find a male professional footballer who happens to be gay or bisexual, and the media can only look at this topic through one lens, as it were. Actually, there's a whole host of really fascinating kind of LGBT individuals as you go down the football pyramid. And, one of those stories was able to tell a couple of weekends ago on Coming Out Day, and there was a huge interest around that. So, for me, it goes back to that human interest. My responsibility, I feel, is to not only, use the influence that I have to get those people more visible, if they want to be. Obviously, not everybody does, but also to encourage my wider industry, and sports media LGBT is kind of the vehicle for that, to kind of understand more about the landscape rather than just try to look at this topic through, as I say, only one lens.
Musa, same question for you. What's your responsibility for long-term change?
I need to, so I've benefited, one thing I want to mention, I benefited from class a lot. So my first break in sport didn't come because I broke the mold. It's because the mold was broken for me. Shout out to Heather Holden Brown, because if I hadn't met her through to be honest, my boarding school, private school networks, I might not have been a published writer yet, because she gave me that in. The book got rejected by 12 other people, 12 other publishers. One publisher took it, and that book changed my entire life, that first book. So what I can say is I've benefited from class structure, so I need now to open up my networks more widely, more football writing clinics, more outreach through the Stadio podcast, more writers on that site. My entire career path, I think, and my ultimate agenda is to demystify what it means to be a football writer, both through my actions as a writer, but my work as a mentor. I think I can do more of that. And again, like Shireen, I think my job is to become irrelevant, because the biggest tragedy of sports writing at the moment is we're not seeing the best stories. Paul Pogba, most expensive football in the world at one point, grew up as a working class Black Muslim boy, and we only talk about his race, and that's a negative thing. We don't talk about his faith. We don't really talk about his class, because we're missing out diversity. And hopefully, by the time my time is done, by the time even the beard falls out, we won't be having these conversations. So yeah, that's.
They talk about his hair as well. His hair is a great.
Yeah, thanks. I know everyone else on this podcast, apart from John's, got hair, so don't rub it in. Don't rub it in.
Shireen, same question for you because we've had a few questions come in. So last one for you. What's your responsibility for long-term change?
I'm gonna just cite Musa, demystify what what a sports writer looks like. And that's my existence is doing that, changing the way that people perceive that and what's included and who can be included. I too have class privilege and educational privilege. I don't have language barriers per se. And also to understand what's happening all over the world in the different global networks. I have sports writer friends in Lagos, and, you know, I have sports writer friends in Karachi, and their work is so important, so fundamental. And I think including them in the greater conversation, and without, you know, always praying at the altar, worshiping at the altar of England, and sports media and football discussions that come out of there. This is something that I will speak to, decolonizing very much the way we think about sport. I mean, shout out to my friends in Australia. I don't even know what time it is there, but I mean, you know, at the Siren, and all my friends down there, friends in Germany, friends that we've connected with all over, and from Latinx communities. And that's, I think that's also key, is connecting with more people is part of my mission, to very much to what Marion said, that you're not alone. It can be a terribly lonely place sometimes. You can feel so excluded and isolated, but you're really not. And so I think that for me, to help create those connections is part of my mandate.
Yeah, was it? Thank you to everybody that's been sending in your questions, but we've had a fair few in, so I'm only going to be able to come to a couple of them because of time. So this is the first one. What is the panel's view or experience of diversity and promoting equality within fan-generated media, e.g. fanzines and podcasts? So I come to you for that one, Shireen, because you're like the podcast queen.
I was going to hand it over to the podcast king himself. I mean, ours is very much a collaborative effort, and independent, and word of mouth. And I think one of the things that we've been very lucky for was that collaborative, where we really knew that it was an anti-oppressive lens, and we were going to have conversations. Also, having two sports historians, Dr. Brenda Elsey and Dr. Amira Rose Davis, was just part of it. I don't think we sought that out, but then even seeking information and understanding context from sports sociologists, because this is something, when I speak with young sports journalists, I remind them, whether it's podcasting, whether it's feature writing, whatever it is, get your context, use these sports, sports historians and sociologists, cultural anthropologists. One of my mentors is a cultural anthropologist who studied Muslim women in sports, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Dr. Sertaj Siglikoglu. And I will never forget that. She gave me the encouragement. She's like, you're a sports activist, you can be a journalist, gave me that. And I will always be grateful. And to share that going forward, podcasting, storytelling, whatever, keep that in mind. There's always a context. There's always something deep and profound in what you're doing. Don't skim over that. And time allowing, like, give yourself the space to look into that a little deeper.
Musa, do you want to add to that?
I can't add much, because actually Shireen's podcast is the gold standard in terms of its content and how it's structured. It really is like it's the gold standard. So there's nothing I can say that adds much to that. All I would add is, I would just say the pressure is on us as people running the podcast to find people. There's often people from marginalized communities, and that relates to class as well as race, don't have the confidence to reach out. And because of class, because of race, some people feel more empowered or entitled than others to demand your time. So I always feel that responsibility to go out and find those voices. So shout out to Wepea Batungu. Wepea is an amazing analyst. I think he's in his teens, based out in Ghana, who broadcasts often from his mum's Zoom account. It's adorable. But he's like, this guy knows everything about, like, German football tactics, like way more than I do. So it's about finding those people, giving them platforms to write for us, empower them through podcasts, and just build up their confidence. But that's all I'd add, because apart from that, Shireen, basically, they're bossing it. Shireen's bossing it.
John, I've got a question for you. In yesterday's Football People session, Michael Sam, who's a former NFL player, spoke openly about his experience of being a gay black man and the lack of support from the NFL. He no longer plays professionally, and his mistreatment has impacted his personal and professional life. How do we address homophobia and discrimination that is so embedded in sports structures to help support LGBT plus players and allow them to flourish in their profession? How can journalists help to change the discourse?
I mean, the Michael Sam story there's a lot to learn, I think, from his experience, particularly the media spotlight that was shone on him when he came into the NFL draft. I think if you look at the contrast between the experience of somebody like Ryan Russell, who came out as bi in the NFL last year, Russ is somebody who was already within that structure, obviously not currently signed to a team, whereas Michael was coming in from college football into the NFL. Michael was placed under this enormous pressure. The cameras were there, monitoring him, sort of his relationship with his boyfriend at the time. He was really kind of thrust into the spotlight, whereas Russ was able to own his own coming out experience. He was able to kind of, write his own story. There was much more sensitivity even then, I think, around how Russ's story was told in the media. So essentially, I kind of think the media got it wrong badly when Michael Sam came into the NFL, and he ended up having that kind of albatross around his neck of not being able to be anything other than just the gay athlete in that space. I think now there's a greater understanding about how being LGBTQ is a different experience for lots of different people, and to have yourself so under pressure like Michael was can have a really debilitating effect on your mental health, and you're never kind of going to be able to hit your peak performance when you've got all that going on around you. So I'm encouraged to see this kind of conversation around being LGBT in sport is shifting more towards a greater understanding about how being in the closet is a mental health problem. And what we want to do is encourage people to feel the liberation of being able to be out in their sport and then see their performance benefit off the back of it.
Musa,
you want me to add to that?
You were waving.
I want to say the thing with Michael Sam was he was a hell of a player. He was like SEC Defensive Player of the Year. And the message that sends, here's the thing, this is my cynical view on it. What journalists can do to help athletes, most athletes are not going to be out, right? So what journalists can do is create a space for conversation where the athletes, whether they're out or not for the course of their careers, feel respected and empowered, because at some point in their careers, they might need to have a conversation with a journalist off the record. Can you address this issue? So we can almost be firefighters for them. We can put out problems before they arise, and they can see us there and they can take comfort. Because look, I'm an openly bisexual journalist, right? And the reason I'm open is because I made a gamble years ago that I was talented enough to take rejection for my sexuality and my race and still succeed. And I do that on behalf of people who can't speak out. So those of us that have platforms can talk about queer issues openly, and we can take the heat for people whose primary day job is to be amazing at sport. You're a queer athlete. It's hard enough being world-class at sport, right? My job is to take the heat for certain issues. That's what I signed up for. I'm doing it. I don't always love it, but I'm good at it. I'll carry on doing it. And we're basically their shield for them to go out and just do what they have to do.
Last question to you all, and if you can keep it super brief, as the young people say, I'd really appreciate it, but it's a really important question. Shireen, I'll come to you first. It says, marginalized groups carry more labor, intellectually and emotionally tax within this context. What can the panel suggest for self-care as part of a political act, aka Audre Lorde? I think this is critical for marginalized groups working in the media, and in brackets, from super fan of all the panelists, Michelle Moore. Hello, Michelle. Hope you're well.
Hey, wow, Michelle, the great Michelle. Wow.
Shireen, let's come to you for that one.
Hello, Michelle. Love you. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. The great Audre Lorde. And I think that for me, it's watching reruns of Bend It Like Beckham. It is eating ice cream. It is just breathing. My youngest son did a thing with me last night, an exercise in breathing. I'm like, what is this? He's like, breathing, Mama. It's called breathing exercises. So I was like, oh, this is new. And taking the time to recognize that you might need to slow down. We're all burning the candles at both ends. Burn It All Down is my side hustle. I'm a full-time graduate student in a master's program. I'm working full-time on top of that. And then there's Burn It All Down. And I'm not the only one. All of us are carrying and wearing so many hats and hijabs or whatnot. So to take a minute just to breathe right now, it's autumn in Canada, and it's absolutely gorgeous outside. The leaves are changing colors and it's delightful, and I look really cute in like vests and boots and stuff. So I will take that time to go outside and go for a walk, and just in being around my children is incredibly centering. I mean, there's nobody that will ground you more. You're like, oh, I just did this amazing thing. They're like, that's nice. Can you make me a smoothie? So be around people who can, to be around people that are not consumed with the same things as you are all the time is my advice.
John?
Yeah, I mean, particularly in these times, I think the blurring of lines between home life and work is increasingly difficult. For me, I have a passion, obviously, for what I do. The kind of the LGBT sports media thing is obviously really important to me, but I get a lot of benefits of just seeing other people doing what they're doing and kind of breaking the mold in their own way, particularly, across sport. Whether it's fan groups or whether it's people working at organizations that we've said are pretty conservative, but they're smashing down the walls in their own way. I think that's really, really encouraging. So I take a lot of benefits from that. And coffee is really important. So that gets me through.
Yeah, I'm more of a tea person for myself, but it's a good shout. Musa, last word for you, please.
I'll be really quick to say, get a WhatsApp group. I'm not joking, but if you work in this field and you're working on so much stuff, you'll get a tweet that upsets you. Put it in the WhatsApp group for your friends. They'll deconstruct it for you. They'll calm you down. They'll give you ideas. And all of a sudden, you've got like 4 amazing pieces of advice in the course of half an hour. Second thing is stay hydrated. Always, always. And that's it for me.
I second the WhatsApp group as well. I've got several, and I've got a group of friends who don't work in sport at all, and it's just nice able to go rah for about.
Exactly.
My favorite WhatsApp group is one that's actually called "Can't Tweet This."
Yeah.
Shit.
Oh my God.
That's what it's called. Amazing.
My one's called the Council of Good Friends. They know who they are. Shout out to the Council of Good Friends.
Yeah, highly recommend it. Guys and gal, thank you so much for your contributions today. It's been lovely to have you on the panel. My thanks to John Holmes. How can people find you on social media, John?
So my Twitter is johnboy79, so really snappy, and Sports Media LGBT, if you look for us there as well.
Brilliant stuff. Shireen, amazing as always. Where can we find you on social media?
Thank you so much. And thank you, Anne-Marie, for doing an incredible job moderating. We're a bit rowdy, but that's okay. Thank you for that. I am on Twitter.
Only Marion school.
Twitter's @ Shireen Ahmed _ and I'm on Instagram @ @footybedsheets.
And Musa, I'm not even going to try saying goodbye in German. So thank you for your contribution. How can people also find you on social media?
My handle is @Okwonga, my surname, or @Stadio, which is my podcast. And if you want to complain about me, @Ryan Hun, because everyone normally does that. So yeah, @Ryan Hun.
And big thanks, of course, to Marion Reimers, who's had to go off and do some Champions League stuff. I'm sure she's going to enjoy watching Real Madrid later, as well as Shireen Ahmed as well. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. Do continue the conversation on social media using the hashtag football people. Big thanks for watching. Big thanks for the questions as well. They've been absolutely brilliant. Take care of yourselves. Enjoy the rest of the week, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Pleasure. Take care.